Okay, well, welcome to episode, I guess this would be 4 of Dano Says So. Sir. I suppose the fact that I've known today's guest for about 35 years has very little to do with what inspired me to have him on this series. His work very recently and during a lot of the current political upheaval in this country has been speaking to me as loud as anything he's ever done. It's one of those situations where if a picture's worth 1,000 words, you let Martin out a couple words to a picture and its power is immeasurable. So Martin Sprouse, thank you for doing this.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate it, man. It's good to see you. Really good to see you.
Appreciate that. So one of the things that I was thinking,
right?
Pardon?
35 years, right?
So Billy and I were at Maximum in 85. I don't know if you remember that trip. We were there for 3 or 4 days, and it was Verbal Assault was there on the Learn tour. They played a DRI gig in downtown San Francisco. It was all a very new world to me. That's the first time I know we hung out. Now, whether when we were both, not anywhere near the Bay Area and fanzine nerds, I don't remember whether we were in communication. I know I had leading edge issues,
Oh, we met before I moved to San Francisco.
Probably, but, Alzheimer's, head wounds, bad teeth.
Yeah, because I remember the first time I met Billy, and that was way before I moved.
Strangely enough, when we were kids, Billy was a lot more outgoing than I was. A lot more so.
But I met you through Billy, but yeah.
You absolutely did. So your timeline is probably more accurate than I am. You're not a drinker,
35, 36 years, something like
there
that.
There we
go. Okay, anyways.
That's fine. So, somebody was telling me they prefer the old stories to the theory, and I said, tough, you're going to get a lot of theory. So I was thinking about something when I was looking at a lot of the recent Chord Politics stuff. And it was that, it's in my wheelhouse. It appeals to me on a very visceral level. It gives visual voice to a lot of things that I think. But it made me think for the purposes of this interview. Do you feel like that kind of work just preaches to the choir? Or do you think visuals have the ability to go beyond what maybe just words and editorial does?
No, preaching to the choir, I've never subscribed to that theory at all. I mean, that's just defeatist attitude. Just nothing doesn't even cross my mind. I don't give a fuck about that shit. Never. I mean, the main thing I do, the reason why I've done things, since day one of being involved in the punk scene is to do them for myself and work with other people and see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
I've never been one to like convert people or, get people to do one thing or another, or even really see things a certain way. It's just kind of like, here's my take on it and see what happens.
Yeah, but by the same token, anytime I think if you point out the pure toxicity of a situation, whether naively or subconsciously or whatever, that does involve the intention or the hope of changing that situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's really weird because my brain doesn't go that way, and I'm not denying what you're saying at all,
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not, sitting there. That's not the reason why I'm making the graphics or why I'm doing this stuff is to get people to see it this way. It's mainly to say it, and maybe I think people figure it out on their own. They see the graphic and it confirms what they're feeling, or it pisses them off, or or it makes them laugh, or they feel comfort and solidarity, which I think is a huge part of the graphics. It's not only just like you make a fuck the police graphics, not just to piss off the police, it's to make comfort for people that have that same feeling and that, add comfort in that and solidarity.
That strikes me as having very real value because it keeps them in the fight.
Very important. Very important. Breaks silence, breaks distance, and in some ways, in a lot of ways, just, because I come from early 80s punk rock like you, there's also a lot of humor in it too.
Agreed. Absolutely.
Sometimes a fuck the police graphic can make you laugh, and it's important for all of us to make it laugh. It's not trying to make it not a serious subject at all, or make light of it. But if you see Big Bird, poster of Big Bird saying "fuck the police," it still strikes me as funny. But it's still a very serious graphic. Right. I'm not taking anything away from that message, even just using those 3 simple words.
To my perception, because most of our communication is online, which means it's a sentence long. It seemed to me like a few times the use of your graphics or where they've ended up or the way that they've reached people has really caught you off guard. I'm thinking of some building projections I've seen and things like that. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, there's a group in the Bay Area called Resistance SF that does projections. And the main dude that does that, man, this sounds so cliche, but that dude is a soldier. He is out there every night projecting in San Francisco, in Oakland, he's doing the Fremont mayor's garage right now, doing local activism. The dude is dedicated, and he found me through Instagram, and he has projected a lot of my graphics on walls in downtown Oakland and San Francisco, the federal building. It's amazing.
During George Floyd, I mean, you were on walls downtown, weren't you? It's weird referring to George Floyd like an era, but what I'm saying is during the early weeks of the really heavy BLM stuff this year, you were up there on the walls in light, yeah?
Yeah. And that's the same dude in downtown Oakland. He did a huge projection, this one graphic that was just text. And this other local dude that works at a school took an amazing photo of it. It was on Instagram.
Make sure you send me that one.
Yeah, it's a beautiful photo, and it just says, we don't negotiate with racists, Oakland, California.
Right.
I've done different versions of that, and that one is one of the huge ones that got projected on a wall downtown in Oakland, right next to like where all the shit was going down.
Stuff is incredibly clean and incredibly simple, and in that tends to be its impact. Do you ever find that you put too many brushstrokes on a piece? That you water it down unintentionally, just being a perfectionist, or it's just that damn good?
The struggle, man. Well, I mean, so for the clean graphic, I mean, that's always been my kind of take on punk rock graphics. As much as I like ripped and torn and really, as long as it's real and not fake, but like ripped and torn and thrown together graphics, I love that look, right? It's beautiful, like heavy collage. I'm talking about like older stuff, even early 80s hardcore stuff, but I've always, from my own thing, I've always think it's pretty interesting to do super crisp and clean graphics, but still have a super hard message.
No, your stuff has always been pretty super stridently outside the punk rock wheelhouse. Probably not in your opinion, but I mean early on.
Not in my opinion at all. Not in my opinion at all. But it's just like adding to the definition of punk rock graphics, I think.
Well, to me, it made sense in terms of how it sat with the intention of this movement or genre or subgenre or whatever it was in terms of wanting to communicate, but it was definitely out of step, which I guess is also a central tenet of what we were supposedly doing. So
yeah, for me 100%. It's also just that subversive thing of taking really clean, almost like corporate minimalism look or Swiss minimalism, whatever
right.
You want to say, and applying it to this punk rock message that has only gotten harder from me with time, and just looking at that impact, and it just, for some reason it works. And just the language for me just keeps working like that. And also I just think the more you take out, the better, like I can't do words very well. I'm not a word guy like you, or even like John Yates is really good with incorporating words. I'm the guy that takes words out of his graphics. Like if I can get it to 2 words or 3 words,
right.
It's solid. And if one of those words is fuck, then it's a win.
Well, you have a comfort with doing that I just don't have. And by the way, just so you know, full disclosure here, the idea of me sitting here talking about myself like I'm a graphics guy while we discuss you and John is not, well, it's the height of arrogance. So thank you for not calling me on it.
No, I mean, you have a graphic eye. You always have. I think look and logos and, image for the lack of, of your bands and, the look and feel of it has always been a thing. I've always known that about you. But the what was the question? What was it?
Oh, we were just talking about about having an appetite for and a comfort with going minimal.
Oh yeah, I do. And you kind of have to have that because sometimes you're leaving it up to the viewer to kind of pick up on it. There's some subtleties there. Like I'm not afraid of the subtleties. I'm not afraid of people having to kind of do a little bit of work where not everything is spelled out. It's not vague for the purpose of being vague, but there's also like faith that people will figure it out. And when they figure it out, it's there. And it's not a puzzle. It's just like, you can take, not everything needs to, for me, not everything needs to be explained. Or if you can get the message across with as few words as possible, it's even more successful for me, for the type of image I'm going for, And yeah, sometimes you can need some guts to do it, minimalism, it's not easy.
Again, you have the courage to do so, and I think it's important to acknowledge it. It's like I said, there's never too many brushstrokes on your stuff. Okay, and we have discussed
sometimes it backfires. Sometimes it backfires, but it's okay.
Fair enough. We've discussed the now, and we've discussed the arrival and the recent inspiration in having you on here. Now let's get into the then, because it's a trippy path. And in the case of musicians who I'm interviewing, you can pretty much Google them, and you can spot where they were everywhere along the line, right?
Yeah.
Even with you and I having known each other all these years, the only thing I know is San Francisco after San Diego. Not really what inspired the moves, what occurred in the moves. I don't know if it's a universal interest, but living in the Bay Area is a peculiar bird and a uniquely political animal in a lot of ways. I also kind of want to hear about how it's changed over the last 3 years.
Yeah.
So take me to a young Martin in the leading edge. What was inspiring you to do it? What was the methodology, and what drove you north?
Yeah. So me and my friend Pat Weekland and Jason Traeger started Leading Edge in San Diego in 83, I think it was. We started the idea in 82. We kind of came out the first issue in 83. And the idea, we were just involved in the punk and hardcore scene in Southern California. We were all teenagers. And San Diego in the early 80s was pretty rough. I mean, it was like a lot of fights, a lot of drugs, had a kind of an older feel to it. And we were kind of like new, young, hardcore kids, And it was, there was some of us, but wasn't a lot of us in San Diego. And then we just said, we didn't do drugs, we didn't drink, we skateboarded, we liked hardcore. We didn't really like the old junkie punk as much. We liked the music, but we didn't like that scene at all. Even though we were friends with everybody, we weren't there, causing, we weren't against those people. It was all, back then punk was just one thing. But
right, definitely.
It really was, and that's super important, but we just weren't hanging out with those people. We were friends with them, but that wasn't our thing. So we decided to do this fanzine, and it just was purely organic and leading edge, and it just kind of trying to cover, without even putting much thought into it, what was happening in the early 80s hardcore scene, where it was, sounds a little cliche now, but like the positive aspects of things, like we're gonna break up fights, we're gonna
leading edge as much as people like, say, Pat Longry, and some of the kids up here in Orange County, or Pat Dubar, some of those people. Yeah. Leading Edge played just as big a role in driving me towards exploring things like 7 Seconds and, increasing my understanding of the minor threat world. I was one of the early Orange County kids who let go last of his leather jacket, his long black hair.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. At the same time, we loved punk rock. We were still punk rock hardcore kids. It was just such a crossover there. I mean, it kind of, separated a little bit more, as in the 83, 84, 85. But we were doing that stuff, but it was still 100% punk rock. But we still had, hardcore anti-racist stuff in there, hardcore anti-cop stuff. Growing up in Southern California, you just could not be friends with cops,
Agreed.
You were punk rock, it's just that's where we got our education, and so we did that we did 5 issues. And it was just, we had no idea what the fuck we were doing. First issue was just photocopied out of Pat's. When we went to some copy shops and we used Pat's mom's office copier, just crazy shit like that. But we started becoming pen pals with people, which you did back then, and it just took off. And then the production of everything went up 1,000 notches by the second issue. We were printing it. I actually printed the second issue in my high school graphic arts class. Yeah. That's amazing. That doesn't happen anymore. We printed a punk rock fanzine with swear words, anti-cop articles,
sabotaging the American school place.
Dude, it was Mr. Bentley. He was a graphic arts teacher at Mira Mesa High.
Yeah.
Amazing dude. And we did that. And
you pick up a lot of your chops there, or your early chops.
I just learned how to do technical stuff like printing, offset printing. But graphic arts and all that stuff, that's all self-taught. Never. I didn't go to college. barely graduated high school, you know? I mean,
that gives a 52-year-old Dan and his laptop hope.
it's just like, you know, you just figure things out on your own. I mean, I've always been that guy, you know, and it's just like, it's also not afraid to look at things differently. You know, like I always like doing graphics a little bit different. Like even the clean aesthetic that you were talking about, you can see that in the early leading edges, you know? And also a huge part of it was Jason's artwork in there. Having Jason Traeger was an incredible artist.
I have a Jason Traeger tattoo, which no, I will not show for the camera. But I have one of his little
hardcore guys,
little hoodie cartoon characters on my left arm for 32 years. Yeah,
I've never seen that, Dan. Is it not good?
It has a weird mole in it that looks like a nipple. On that note, what drove you to the Bay Area?
Offer to join Maximum Rock and Roll.
Right.
So the story is, and it's, you know, I'll make it quick, is that, you know, we used to come up here and visit Maximum Rock and Roll to kind of, you know, see the Bay Area scene. This is like 84, we started coming up here.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, one time when I was up here visiting, me and Jason came up here, and Bessie and Joan from Paranoia Fanzine from Reno, from the Rex, were in staying at the Maximum House too. And by the end of the visit, Tim sat us all down and had this proposal where he wanted to start looking for a building to open a punk club. And he wanted people to take over, you know, not, you know, Maxim was a group of people doing things, but kind of do the day-to-day kind of main organizer thing, take over that role and work with the daily shit worker people to make the magazine happen. So he presented it, and the way it kind of originally fell into place is that me, Jason, and Bessie Oakley would move here and run the magazine with all the contributors and shit workers, and Tim would start on this new thing of trying to find a building to open a punk club. That was the very fucking beginning of Gilman Street right there.
Yeah, clearly.
Yeah. So then after a couple months, Bessie decided not to do it. Jason decided not to do it for various reasons. So I moved up here in 85, like summer of 85.
God, when Billy and I came up, we must have just been a few months behind your move.
Yeah, because you came to the Clipper Street house, right? Yeah.
We came to the street with the house on Clipper. We also came on a weekend. We came up there to meet Bessie and Mike Truchon. So when you started talking about Bessie a few minutes ago, I was like, man, that was a small world that moved fast.
So true. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, because everybody was coming. I mean, everybody stayed at the Maximum House every day, right?
I had to ask Ian MacKay to move his car. One of my great baptismal moments in punk rock.
Ian has stayed at that house a lot. But so then I just came up there and I just helped. You know, I just joined the Maximum Rock and Roll staff and kind of came in and helped with the day-to-day stuff. And then, you know, people started looking for Gilman, and that thing took off that way. But that was the original thing that why I came up here. And so I stopped Leading Edge when I moved up here. So Leading Edge only had 5 issues.
One of the things I remember about Maximum Rock and Roll, and you know, we've never really talked about how you look back on it and the role it played in your life, which had to be huge simply by virtue of your duration there and your influence. One of the things that used to trip me out was those massive staff meetings in the basement. Because if you look,
they went the year ones.
Yeah. But if you would look back, the collection of personalities and talent in that room, you know, and the combination of ego and intellect that would be involved in those debates is something I would kill to have video of now.
It's actually really true. I mean, the Maximum staff, even people that just wrote like 3 zine reviews a month or 1 record, man, they were just a huge part of that magazine. That was a really important part. That's one of the millions of misconceptions people have at Maximum, that, you know, whether they might not have been there at the time, or they, you know, never really understood what it was. It wasn't a Tim Yo thing. There was a lot of people involved there, and a lot of people had just as strong opinions and influence as Tim Yo on that magazine.
I almost think that one of the things, and not to speak ill of the dead, and I guess it's not really speaking ill, it's just unfortunate that he's not present to be asked about these things. But I feel like one of the things that undid it for me and that led to my becoming less involved, even though I was living up there, was that he seemed to start to, at least to my perception, started to sort of unilaterally control a lot of policy in terms of what type of music would be covered. There started to be this real lean towards the faux garage, Purple Onion scene, you know, and it just didn't have anything to do with what I was doing. And I didn't feel like it was truly the will of the group, you know?
I don't think that's true.
Okay. Well, it was to my perception.
No, I feel that. I mean, I think at the time, I think the influence of the magazine was guided by the people that worked on the magazine. That garage scene that you were talking about was a huge part of the San Francisco scene at that time, right? That Purple Onion thing, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't remember what years that was, you know, like mid 90s, something like that.
Maybe 93.
Yeah, and a lot of those people worked on Maxim at the time, so a lot of that music is going to be covered, you know. But it was never I don't know what kind of music you were doing or into at the time, but it was never had an anti-hardcore thing. I mean,
I have very rarely listened to what I'm making.
Did you get a shitty review? Is this what this is about? One of your records got a shitty review?
No, I remember certain records stopped getting reviewed, or maybe that's a false memory, and maybe I've bought into an outside line on that. But.
So there's things, you know, like the definition of punk and what got covered in Maximum is always up for debate and was always up for debate. What got covered, what didn't, since day one of Maximum, you know, and probably still is to the extent of how they're doing it now. It always will be, and not everybody's going to agree with it. A lot of people are going to be left out. Some people hold a grudge forever. That was just part of it, you know, doing a music magazine like that, you know, because everyone has their own definition of punk, especially in punk, and they're very vocal about it, you know. So, but Tim didn't guide the music direction of the magazine. People think he did, but there were hardcore kids reviewing hardcore records when they were reviewing all that garage stuff too.
And so now I sit
very prominent.
Now I sit here unable to apologize to the dead. This is just no good.
Yeah, Tim scattered at sea, so I think you're safe, man.
Fair enough. All right.
No, but you're not alone in that feeling. You know, not alone in that feeling. But it wasn't that way.
Okay, well, there's been a lot of post-Maximum rock and roll Martin Sprouse, but it also happens to be post-Bay Area Dan. In other words, during the years that we really sort of lost track of each other. Why don't you tell me about, 90s, 2000, 2010s? I moved in 98.
Really? And you were up here for how long?
I was up there for just about 6 years.
God, really?
Yeah. I moved up. I moved up after my mother died. I didn't really consciously grasp what I was doing. I did it under the guise of being closer to Suzanne, but even I am not that, girlfriend obsessed to do that. I realize now it was, doing a geographic from a traumatic event.
I do remember seeing you at a Purple Onion show.
Strange.
The Makers, remember that? I saw you at a Makers show. And I think you were so surprised to see me there as I was to see you there. Young Frankenstein. No, not Young Frankenstein. Sorry, what am I saying?
If you think I knew who any of the bands were, you're on crack. Matt James and I were on like an espionage mission at that point. It's not.
You remember? Do you remember the show I'm talking about?
I remember the exact show you were talking about. It's the only time I ever went. Yeah.
God, that's so crazy. That might have been one of the few times that I went. And yeah, I saw you there. So we were both at a Purple Onion show. The Makers were good, but
that stain just won't wash off.
And now everybody knows, Dan. Everybody knows.
Oh, well.
No shame.
Hey, listen, you're talking to King Edgebreaker here. My own heritage has been shat on by yours truly to an irreparable extent, and I wouldn't change it. And I wouldn't change it for the world.
So what was your question? What
post-Maximum rock and roll, Martin in the Bay Area, Oakland, etc. I mean, I know you design furniture. I'm imagining that's what pays the bills.
Yeah.
But you're in for whatever you see as relevant to this. What's gone on since the 90s.
Since the 90s.
Well, we're basically looking at since the turn of the century, which is a lovely phrase. It doesn't help me feel young.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was really doing my work a lot, trying to stay alive and run my own business.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Then I started, making more graphics. This was, I was just making them for Facebook a long time ago.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then just to kind of they were more funny than anything. And then doing those, and they just became more and more focused on, I said, oh, this is what I'm going to do now. This reminds me of like doing fanzines back in the early 80s,
right.
Except everyone sees them instantly in their full color, which was pretty amazing to me.
The instant gratification that comes with the digital age, that I embrace. But I love people. I love rubbing the level of successful networking we were able to do pre-cellular.
I know, right?
Right. But
But
the ability to do a graphic and see it online an hour later, oh man, it's heaven.
yeah, I mean, like it's just how it is now. But back then it was like you do something and people wouldn't see it for 3 months, and it would be black and white and it'd be kind of printed, kind of shitty, and you're like, fuck, But then again, you were in full control of things. Now, like I'm doing all my graphics on Instagram. Instagram is not it's not DIY there, but it's the format that I use to get the message out there. That's the compromise I make, much like, using distributors and stuff back then, to get the message out there, and having to sell things. I don't have to sell anything. Everyone sees it for free now.
What was the Bay Area like during Occupy?
It was good. It was, there was hope. It has, Oakland always has Oakland always, I'm very partial. You know what it's like. Oakland always has a good vibe.
Yeah, but the rest of the world doesn't. I mean, if I could have sold my soul to be anywhere in the country during Occupy, I'd have been in Oscar Grant Plaza.
Right. So you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, but Oakland, that's kind of why I asked.
Yeah, Oakland has a solid vibe, and just the community and the activism and the history, and just also the rawness and just new ideas, new people, and also just there's not a lot of bullshit in Oakland. It is, it's a hard city. There's not a lot of money here. There never will be. At least, well, gentrification's coming, or it's here in many ways, but it's not. Oakland's big. Oakland's huge. But just that level of creativity and the level of, soul is just so real, and the protests had a really amazing vibe, and there was really good hope. And, Oakland crosses over, like the Port of Oakland becomes involved in politics and strikes right away, which is awesome. I remember the footage from the general strike during Occupy in Oakland. Is the footage from the port as being some of the most inspiring footage I saw in the entire country. Port of Oakland does not fuck around, man.
No.
Longshoremen and that union is strong, and they do not take shit, and they fucking just put everything on the line, and they are part of Oakland. That is Oakland history, and that's a really amazing thing. And that crosses over during Occupy. It crossed over during, the Black Lives Matter, George Floyd demonstrations, where they shut all the ports down on the West Coast. The whole union did, and it was, it wasn't only just to say Black Lives Matter. It's just to say they're against, systemic racism. They're against racist cops. They didn't, it's not subtle. They go for it. They're there 100%. And that's a huge part of the Oakland vibe. It's always
tripped me out. It's the landing point for a lot of politically minded and creatively minded people's sort of exodus from the shelter of their original hometown. A lot like a place like Olympia is. But Oakland, Oakland makes so much sense to me. And it always catches me off guard that the world really doesn't actually know. I'm guilty if you look over my shoulders, but, you say Oakland and the world will always think Raiders, And I'm dyed in the most.
99% of Raiders fans don't live in Oakland,
Hey, here's one who did briefly.
I'm not knocking you. I'm just saying there's so many, people that live elsewhere, and I live like 5 minutes from the Oakland Stadium, or that used to be their stadium.
Raider fans suffer from the belief that they back the only team in all of professional sports that is actually a counterculture unto itself.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
And there's no way I could ignore that. That and the fact that I had a weird happenstance where I just met a bunch of them when I was a small town. Kept running into giant men who turned out to be Oakland Raiders, and it stuck with me.
Yeah.
So it sounds to me like your talents and your passions land you exactly where you should be. So congratulations for that. You do incredible work in an incredible town. Can you imagine being anywhere else?
Right now, other than Oakland, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Nah, I'd move.
Okay.
I live in East Oakland, and I ended up here. Me and my girlfriend broke up. I ended up out here, and I've been here 10 years. I've lived in the Bay Area since '85. I haven't lived in Oakland, except for 10 of those years. A big part of that life was in San Francisco. But Oakland just feels so good. It's really nice, and I'm surrounded by good people.
I've got to tell you, I don't mind ending this interview on you singing the beauties of Oakland, but I don't want to leave any stones unturned if there's anything you wanted to talk about.
Is that it? That was fast, Dan.
You hauled ass, and I'd like to meet my mark for once. But like I say, the form is yours, sir.
No, I mean, it's your show. You tell me what you want, you know. But no, I'm glad we both have a love for Oakland. Oakland's a very important city, always has been, and always will be. You know, for creative, art, politics, and changing the world.
Right. Absolutely.
It's happening. It's happening here, man. There's no bullshit here. And when bullshit does try to come to Oakland, it gets confronted. It really does. That's a beautiful thing.
Way to remind me I live in Reagan country. Fuck off, and it was great talking to you. And thank you so much, Martin. I'm going to kill the record part.
All right, thanks, Dan. I appreciate this a lot, man. Good luck with this thing.